Injustice disguised as policy is one of the most common and subtle ways discrimination finds its way into daily life. It hides behind the mask of rules, regulations, and official protocols, giving those who enforce it the power to justify unfair treatment without openly admitting bias. When someone experiences such injustice, it often comes with a calm but firm explanation like, "It's company policy," or "We're just following the rules." On the surface, this appears harmless, even logical, but beneath it lies a weapon that has historically been used to strip people of dignity, rights, and respect. What makes this form of injustice particularly dangerous is how it convinces bystanders and even the victims themselves that what happened was somehow legitimate, when in reality, it is nothing more than prejudice dressed up in the clothing of authority. In the context of a flight, passengers often put their trust in the crew. The attendants and airline staff are trained to emphasize safety and order, which means their words carry weight. When they say something is against policy, most people don't argue. But when such a declaration is used selectively, against one person while allowing others to enjoy privileges, the imbalance becomes crystal clear. The black CEO who boarded the plane believed he was stepping into an environment where his ticket and his status as a paying customer gave him the same rights as anyone else. Instead, he was confronted with a demand that he move from his VIP seat, not because of any genuine need rooted in safety or protocol, but because someone else, someone white, was deemed more deserving in the eyes of those enforcing the so-called policy. This kind of injustice is particularly humiliating because it is framed in a way that makes resistance seem unreasonable. If the man had refused to leave, the attendant could have easily escalated the situation, calling security, framing him as uncooperative, and perhaps even having him removed from the flight. To the other passengers, he would then appear as the problem, the one making trouble, while the true injustice would be hidden under the veil of official procedure. That is how injustice disguised as policy thrives. It shifts blame from the system to the individual, forcing the victim to either comply and suffer in silence or resist and face harsher consequences. For many people, this scenario is painfully familiar. History is filled with examples where policies were written and enforced to maintain social hierarchies under the guise of order. Segregation in schools, bans on certain communities entering restaurants or hotels, restrictions on voting rights, these were all once defended as the law, the rules, or policy. Even today, in workplaces, schools, and public spaces, individuals from marginalized groups encounter subtle forms of the same tactic. A rule that seems neutral is applied more harshly to one group, while another is granted leniency. A dress code suddenly becomes a tool to shame cultural clothing. A standard procedure becomes the excuse for targeting people based on appearance, accent, or skin color. On the flight, the humiliation of being asked to leave his seat was not just about comfort. It was about stripping away status, about sending an unspoken message that no matter how accomplished, successful, or deserving this black man was, he could still be treated as lesser. The flight attendant's words carried the authority of the airline, and by disguising her actions as policy, she tried to remove accountability from herself. Yet, everyone watching could sense the deeper truth. The policy excuse was flimsy, and the decision was tainted with bias. It is in these moments that injustice reveals itself most clearly, when rules are bent, manipulated, or enforced unequally to favor one person over another. The most damaging part of injustice disguised as policy is not just the act itself, but the way it tries to erase the humanity of the victim. It attempts to reduce them to a problem, an obstacle to be managed, instead of a person with rights and dignity. The black CEO did not just lose his seat, he was being asked to surrender his place in the hierarchy of respect. And for the people who witnessed it, the discomfort came from recognizing that if such treatment could happen to someone of his stature, it could easily happen to anyone with less power or visibility. Silent humiliation in public spaces carries a weight that is often heavier than loud insults. It is the kind of wound that does not need raised voices or physical force to cut deep. Instead, it thrives in quiet moments where dignity is stripped away while others watch in uncomfortable silence. For the person experiencing it, the silence of those around can feel as painful as the act itself. There is a unique cruelty in being wronged in front of others, knowing that they see what is happening, yet no one steps forward to intervene. It creates a sense of isolation, as if the victim has been placed under a spotlight where their humiliation becomes a spectacle for everyone else to consume in silence. When the black CEO was asked to vacate his VIP seat for a white passenger, the request itself was humiliating, but what made it worse was the setting. A crowded airplane, filled with strangers, is a confined space where every action is visible, every whisper audible. The moment the flight attendant told him to move, all eyes shifted toward him. Some passengers may have looked away quickly, not wanting to be involved, while others might have stared in disbelief or curiosity. For the man in the middle of it, this silence was suffocating. His humiliation was not private, it was broadcast to an entire cabin of people who chose to remain bystanders. Silent humiliation is often more damaging than outright confrontation because it denies the victim even the dignity of an open fight. When someone is shouted at least the aggression is clear and recognizable. But when the humiliation is masked with polite tones, quiet words, and unspoken approval from those who say nothing, it becomes harder to challenge. It leaves the victim questioning not only the act but also their own place in the social order. The CEO could not yell, could not demand justice in that moment, because doing so would risk being labeled aggressive or disruptive. Instead, he was forced to absorb the humiliation quietly, knowing full well that everyone around him saw the injustice but chose to remain passive. The silence of bystanders in such moments is powerful. It reinforces the authority of the one doing the humiliating. Each passenger's decision not to speak, not to question, not to challenge, became a silent endorsement of the flight attendant's action. This is how systemic injustice continues to survive, because silence allows it to. People convince themselves that staying quiet keeps them neutral, but in reality, neutrality in the face of humiliation tilts the balance toward the oppressor. The black CEO's silence was not his choice, it was forced upon him by the situation. But the silence of those around him was their choice, and that choice added to his suffering. Silent humiliation is not limited to airplanes. It happens in classrooms when a child is unfairly punished while classmates watch. It happens in offices when a colleague's ideas are dismissed in meetings while others avoid speaking up. It happens in restaurants, shops, and streets when people are profiled, excluded, or degraded while the crowd pretends not to notice. The sting of these experiences lies not only in the initial act but in the collective silence that makes the victim feel outnumbered and unsupported. The black CEO experienced this sting firsthand when not a single passenger challenged the flight attendant's decision in that moment. Some may have thought it was unfair, some may have even whispered about it later, but in the moment of truth, their silence weighed heavier than any words could. The humiliation deepened because of what it implied. In that confined cabin, he was not just being told to leave his seat, he was being told he was less valuable than another passenger, and no one disagreed. The public nature of the act turned his personal pain into a shared spectacle, but without anyone sharing in the burden. That is what silent humiliation does, it isolates the victim even in a crowd. It forces them to carry the shame alone, while others look on, either too afraid, too indifferent, or too comfortable to break the silence. The power of self-respect is something that cannot be taken away, even in the most humiliating and unjust circumstances. It is the inner strength that allows a person to maintain dignity when the world tries to strip it away. In moments of discrimination or mistreatment, self-respect becomes both a shield and a weapon. It shields the individual from internalizing the lies of inferiority, and it becomes a weapon when it reminds everyone watching that true worth does not depend on titles, possessions, or the approval of others. For the black CEO, being asked to give up his rightful seat for someone else was not just a matter of losing a chair, it was a direct attack on his sense of identity and the respect he had earned through years of hard work and success. Yet, what made the moment unforgettable was not the humiliation itself but how he chose to respond with self-respect. When confronted with injustice, many people are tempted to react in anger. Anger is natural, but it can also be used against the victim, turning them into the problem in the eyes of others. The CEO understood this trap. He knew that if he lashed out, if he raised his voice, the narrative would quickly shift away from the injustice he faced to the way he responded. Instead, he held himself with calm authority. His posture, his tone, and his presence communicated something that words could not. He was a man who knew his worth, and no flight attendant's demand could change that. His self-respect did not allow him to shrink, even when others expected him to. It reminded everyone on that flight that his identity as a leader, as a human being, and as a paying customer was not negotiable. Self-respect is powerful because it sends a silent message that cannot be ignored. In that cabin, every passenger who watched the scene unfold could see that this was not just another traveler being inconvenienced. They saw a man who carried himself with quiet strength, who did not beg, did not plead, but also did not allow the humiliation to define him. His presence forced people to think about what was happening on a deeper level. Self-respect, when displayed in moments of injustice, has the ability to shift the focus from the act of mistreatment to the humanity of the person enduring it. It compels people to recognize what they might otherwise ignore. This power is not limited to public figures or people in high positions. Self-respect is something every person has the capacity to nurture. It shows itself in the way someone refuses to let insults dictate their value, in the way they maintain their voice even when others try to silence it, and in the way they continue to walk with dignity after being pushed down. For marginalized groups, self-respect becomes a lifeline. It is what allows them to face a world that often denies their worth and yet still stand tall, unbroken. The black CEO was not only standing for himself in that moment, he was embodying the resilience of countless others who have faced similar trials. His composure was not a sign of weakness or submission, it was an act of defiance rooted in the unshakable knowledge of his own value. What made his self-respect so powerful was the contrast it created with the actions of those around him. The flight attendant relied on authority, rules, and a false sense of superiority to assert control. The white passenger who benefited from the situation sat in silent entitlement, accepting privilege without questioning its fairness. But in the middle of it all stood a man who did not bow, did not crumble, and did not allow his identity to be diminished. His self-respect turned an act of humiliation into a lesson for everyone present. It revealed that true power does not come from enforcing rules or receiving special treatment, it comes from within, from a person's ability to know who they are and to refuse to be defined by the prejudices of others. Self-respect carries a ripple effect that extends beyond the individual. Those who witnessed the scene may not have spoken in that moment, but the image of a man holding onto his dignity in the face of discrimination could not easily be forgotten. It challenges people to reflect on their own choices, their own silences, and their own values. For the victim, self-respect is survival. For the witnesses, it is a mirror, forcing them to confront the uncomfortable truth about the world they live in and the role they play in it. When dignity speaks louder than anger, it changes the entire atmosphere of a situation. Anger, while natural and justified in the face of injustice, is often misunderstood or used against the person expressing it. Dignity, on the other hand, disarms people in a way that raw emotion cannot. It is calm, steady, and unshakable. It carries a kind of authority that no uniform, title, or policy can override. In the case of the black CEO, being asked to leave his seat was a moment that could have easily erupted into chaos. A man of his stature could have shouted, argued, or demanded immediate recognition of his rights. Instead, he chose to let his dignity do the speaking, and that choice created an impact that words alone could never achieve. Dignity does not mean silence or passivity. It is an active force that speaks through posture, tone, and presence. As the flight attendant insisted on removing him from the seat, the CEO's calm composure was in itself a statement. He did not beg for approval, nor did he crumble under the weight of humiliation. His dignity stood tall even when his seat was being taken away. That silent strength carried more power than shouting ever could, because it forced everyone watching to recognize the injustice for what it was. Anger might have given the bystanders an excuse to dismiss him, but dignity left no such escape. It compelled them to confront the uncomfortable truth without distraction. The choice to let dignity speak louder than anger is not an easy one. It requires immense self-control, especially when the injustice is blatant and public. In moments of humiliation, the urge to respond with fury is strong, because anger feels like the only weapon available. But dignity, when held firmly, transforms the situation. It shifts the focus from the reaction of the victim to the actions of the oppressor. On that flight, the contrast was stark, a composed man maintaining his self-respect versus an attendant misusing authority to justify discrimination. The imbalance was undeniable, and it was made clearer by the CEO's decision not to lash out. There is a timeless power in dignity that resonates beyond the moment itself. People who witnessed the event may not have remembered every word that was spoken, but they would not forget the way the CEO carried himself. Dignity lingers in memory because it elevates the victim above the injustice. It creates an image of strength that overshadows the act of mistreatment. When a person remains dignified under pressure, they refuse to let the oppressor write the narrative. Instead, they redefine the story through their conduct, reminding everyone that their humanity cannot be reduced by the cruelty of others. Dignity also exposes the weakness of injustice. Those who rely on unfair treatment, biased policies, or abuse of power often expect resistance to come in the form of anger. They prepare themselves to label the victim as aggressive, unreasonable, or disruptive. But when the victim responds with dignity, it leaves the oppressor unprepared. There is no easy label, no convenient excuse. The quiet strength of dignity throws the injustice into sharp relief, making it impossible to disguise. The flight attendant's actions might have been defended if the CEO had shouted or resisted loudly, but his calm presence made it clear who was truly out of line. The weight of dignity in that moment reached beyond the man himself. It became a silent challenge to everyone else on the plane. While others sat in their silence, perhaps uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene, they could not deny the reality of what they saw. The CEO's dignity acted as a mirror, reflecting back their own inaction. It demanded a deeper response from them than his anger might have, because anger can be dismissed, but dignity commands respect even from those who remain passive. Letting dignity speak louder than anger does not erase the pain of injustice, but it transforms the narrative. Instead of being remembered as a man removed from his seat, the CEO is remembered as someone who faced discrimination with unwavering composure. His dignity became louder than the humiliation, louder than the silence of the passengers, and louder than the authority of the attendant. It was the kind of response that left an imprint on everyone present, reminding them that true strength does not always shout, it sometimes stands quietly, unbroken, and undeniable. ChatGPT said, "The ripple effect of one bold stand often travels farther than anyone can see in the moment." A single act of courage or composure has the power to inspire, challenge, and awaken others in ways that go beyond the immediate situation. On that airplane, when the black CEO refused to let humiliation strip away his dignity, his stand became more than just a personal response to injustice. It became a moment that carried lessons for every witness, and for countless others who would later hear about it. Sometimes the boldest stand is not the loudest one but the one rooted in principle, and its impact can spread like ripples on water, touching lives far beyond the center. In a confined space like an airplane cabin, nothing happens in isolation. Every passenger who watched the interaction was part of an unspoken audience. They saw how a man who had every right to be angry chose instead to show restraint, how he turned a situation designed to humiliate him into one that revealed the unfairness of the system. Even those who chose to remain silent could not walk away unchanged. For some, the event may have sparked guilt for not speaking up. For others, it may have lit a spark of admiration or respect. Either way, the stand he took did not end when he lost his seat, it continued in the thoughts, conversations, and reflections of those who saw it happen. The ripple effect of such a stand often works on two levels. On the surface, it plants questions in the minds of bystanders. Why was he treated this way? Why didn't anyone intervene? How would I have acted if I were in his place? These questions can disturb the comfort of silence and force people to confront the reality of injustice. On a deeper level, the stand inspires others who may face similar challenges in their own lives. The image of a man holding firm to his self-respect can serve as a model for those who are later placed in situations where they are pressured to surrender their dignity. The courage of one person often becomes the courage of many, passed on through memory and example. The CEO's stand on that flight also carried symbolic weight. He was not just an individual, he represented success, leadership, and achievement in a world that often tries to deny such positions to people who look like him. His refusal to bow to humiliation became a message for others who are constantly told, directly or indirectly, that they are less deserving. It said, without words, that worth cannot be dictated by prejudice or by arbitrary rules. This ripple effect extends to communities who hear his story, communities that are strengthened by seeing someone who faced injustice and emerged with dignity intact. The boldness of his stand was not in confrontation but in refusal. Refusal to internalize inferiority, refusal to be broken, refusal to let others define his value. That kind of boldness often leaves a deeper mark than resistance rooted in anger. People may forget arguments, but they rarely forget examples of courage carried with quiet strength. The passengers who left that plane may not have spoken during the incident, but as they recounted the story to friends or family, the image of that man's composure would linger in their words. The story would spread, and with it, the ripple of his stand. Ripples also travel through time. In moments of reflection, weeks or even years later, someone who was there might face a situation where they witness injustice again. They may remember the CEO's calm defiance and choose to act differently than they did before. In that sense, his stand did not just impact one flight, it planted seeds of courage that could grow in the future. Bold stands have that power, to live beyond the moment, to influence actions yet to come, to echo in spaces the original actor will never see. The ripple effect also challenges systems. Companies, organizations, and industries rely on patterns of silence to keep discriminatory practices unchallenged. But when a story of one bold stand gains attention, it forces institutions to respond. Airlines, workplaces, and public platforms can no longer pretend these incidents are isolated. The ripples turn into waves that push against the structures of injustice. What began as a single humiliating moment for one man can become a catalyst for broader conversations about fairness, equality, and accountability. A message the world cannot ignore is often born from moments of pain that transform into symbols of strength. The story of the black CEO being removed from his VIP seat was not just another instance of unfair treatment on a plane, it became a powerful message that stretched far beyond that cabin. Sometimes, the way a person responds to injustice resonates louder than the injustice itself. It echoes in conversations, travels across communities, and forces society to confront truths it often tries to bury. In this case, the message was clear: dignity, self-respect, and equality cannot be denied, no matter how subtly discrimination tries to disguise itself. The world is full of stories that fade quickly, but there are moments that strike at the heart of human conscience and refuse to be silenced. What happened on that flight was one of those moments. The passengers may have walked away quietly, but the image of a man being displaced because of the color of his skin remained with them. The crew may have justified their actions with the excuse of policy, but the unfairness was too obvious to be forgotten. And when such moments are shared beyond the space in which they occur, they begin to carry a weight much larger than the event itself. They become lessons, warnings, and calls to action for anyone willing to listen. The message that emerged from this story was not just about racial injustice, though that was at its core. It was also about the silent complicity of those who watch and do nothing, about the abuse of authority disguised as rules, and about the quiet power of a person who refuses to lose their dignity. All of these themes combine to create a message with layers that touch people in different ways. For some, it is a reminder of the discrimination they themselves have faced. For others, it is a wake-up call to recognize the role they play in allowing such treatment to continue. And for those in positions of authority, it is a challenge to examine how their policies and practices may contribute to humiliation rather than fairness. What makes a message impossible to ignore is the way it refuses to leave people comfortable. It unsettles, disturbs, and lingers in the mind long after the event has passed. The CEO's calm defiance sent exactly that kind of message. It refused to fit into the stereotype of anger or disruption that many expect when injustice occurs. Instead, it forced witnesses and later audiences to confront the raw unfairness of what happened without distraction. His presence said more than words could, that no amount of success, achievement, or respect could shield someone from discrimination, and that truth is too painful for a just society to dismiss. This message does not stop at the individual level, it travels into the collective consciousness. Communities who hear the story are reminded that prejudice is not something of the past, it is alive, it is subtle, and it continues to shape experiences in everyday spaces like airplanes, offices, schools, and neighborhoods. The story tells them to remain alert, to recognize injustice when it happens, and to support those who face it. At the same time, it inspires those who are often targeted to carry their own dignity and self-respect with the same quiet strength, knowing that even their silent resistance can speak louder than any humiliation forced upon them. The world cannot ignore such a message because it reflects a universal truth: the demand for respect and equality is not optional, it is essential. Every person who hears this story is confronted with the question of where they stand. Will they remain silent if they witness something similar? Will they allow policies and rules to excuse discrimination? Or will they find the courage to speak, act, and ensure that dignity is never sacrificed for convenience? The message challenges, provokes, and stirs, and once it is heard, it cannot easily be unlearned. In time, stories like this become more than individual accounts, they become symbols. They are retold in speeches, shared in conversations, and remembered as reminders of both human failure and human resilience. This is why the world cannot ignore the message of the Black CEO's experience. It speaks to everyone, victims, bystanders, and those in power, reminding them that equality is not a favor to be granted but a right that must be protected. It forces recognition that silence is complicity, and that dignity, once displayed, cannot be erased by any act of injustice.